I want to first of all, I have to couch my statements very, and the World Bank legal team and U.S. Treasury legal have been very strict about what I say and can't say. So I have to preface everything by saying that the comments I make are my own and they don't reflect Treasury or the World Bank. But so having said that, let me provide a little bit of context and background on what we do. The right? Yep. The slides came from our World Bank Group technology team, so I may skip through a few of those and focus on the things that are important. But the first thing I wanted to talk about is what is the World Bank, and then once we understand that and we can frame a certain problem set, then we can say, all right, how can blockchain help solve some of the problems that the World Bank has? So the World Bank is a multilateral development bank. What that means is you've got a bunch of shareholders. It was founded by the United States after World War II. And the World Bank deploys something like $80 billion every year in emerging markets. And the point of the World Bank is to solve the major problem of getting people out of poverty. So in a nutshell, that's what we do. I represent the U.S. We're the largest shareholder, and we care very deeply about making sure that whatever the World Bank does, it's held accountable to very high standards. And frankly, we're working in places that don't have those standards. So when I came into the bank, I thought to myself, what an interesting way to use distributed ledger technology in this institution, and how can this institution solve a given set of problems? Not all are going to be solved by blockchain, but how can blockchain solve some of those? And I'm going to get into that here in a sec. So I talked a little bit about what the World Bank does, and when I arrived at the bank, there were, in true World Bank fashion, there were 6 or 7 different World Bank initiatives. And I spent a little bit of time interacting with all of them. There was one initiative to look at traceability of fishing. So if you're fishing tuna in Indonesia, you RFID it and you can track it all the way to the table. And you can make sure that the fishing is done, and using geolocation, it's done in a sustainable way. And I thought, well, that's an interesting idea. But is there more? And so this, generally speaking, is what we're trying to do. We're trying to promote transparency around the world, and blockchain can definitely help do that. We can solve some development challenges like corruption more effectively, and we can also progress on our sustainable development goals. So why are we looking at blockchain for development? One of the things that we're working on are marketplaces for natural resources, and I'm going to go a little bit into that in further slides. But furthermore, there are a lot of unbanked individuals that we can help bring into the system. So today, for example, I met with the finance minister of an African country, I won't say which, but they have rampant inflation, they have a number of currency-related issues and financial problems and so forth. And guess what? About maybe 20% of the country uses bricks and mortar banks, but 90% of the country uses a cell phone, and they transfer money around on cell phones. So there are, in certain parts of the world, technology is actually leapfrogging everything that we do here. And so we say to ourselves as the World Bank, how can we put ourselves in a situation where we can blockchain enable and take things in some of these countries that went from no landline telephones to a digital world. But looking at the statistics, there are about a third of the world, so 2 billion of the adult population, around 2 billion, 1.8 billion or so, that are unbanked. And so therein lies an opportunity. And when it comes to governance and accountability, there's yet another element where we can leverage blockchain. Now, this is more in the auspices of the UN and other agencies, but What if you could have elections posted on a blockchain, and you can eliminate fraudulent elections? I'll move on. So this is another initiative that we worked on. So the way the World Bank operates, simplistically speaking, is like this. We issue bonds. We borrow money at, believe it or not, very low rates. Believe it or not, LIBOR minus. So roughly LIBOR minus 13 basis points. And central banks buy World Bank bonds. And we in turn take that and we loan it to emerging markets economies at LIBOR plus 30 to 50 basis points. And we live on that spread, right? So we think to ourselves, how can we lower our cost of borrowing? And so this was an experiment, right? A very small bond. It was 110, what is it, 110? Yep, $110 million that we listed in Australia. And these were 5 investors that purchased the bond. Now what the bond did, it's called Bondi, and it's a blockchain-enabled bond, but we're still working at the details. What we blockchained was the custodial, some of the more back office elements of the bond. It's small, and if you looked at this versus and by the way, there's no secondary market for it, so people aren't buying and selling this bond yet. But what we want to do is we want to grow this initiative so that at some point down the road, there will be a secondary market for World Bank blockchain-enabled bonds. And I'd be curious to know if you take one of our bonds that's blockchain-enabled, where the transaction costs are a lot lower because they're now embedded in the blockchain, the custodial and a lot of the other back office stuff, and compare it to a bond with a similar tenor in a similar market, how they would perform. But we will see. But that's Bond I. We can talk about tokenization. One of the things that I'm trying to work on, and this slide has some elements of that, but consider the following. Right now, the World Bank wires $200 million to pick a country in whatever, in Africa. We wire $200 million, and it's to build a road. That money goes to the finance ministry. The finance ministry takes the money and gives it to the infrastructure ministry. The infrastructure ministry hires a contractor to build the road, and they in turn hire subcontractors and so forth. Along the way, something happens. We call it leakage. And you can take that for what it is. But not all the money goes into building the road. So what about this? And this is one of the things that my office is trying to put forth. What if instead of loaning that government $200 million, what if we wired them $200 million worth of World Bank tokens? So the government now receives the World Bank tokens. It goes to the infrastructure ministry. It goes to the general contractor and the subs and so forth. And everybody along the way is getting paid in tokens. At some point, you have to convert to fiat currency, obviously. So you do that at the World Bank office, and somebody comes in, and because you have thumbprints and biometric scanners and iris scanners, if you can verify that you are who you say you are, right? I'm the electrical contractor. Here's who I am, and you can prove it. Well, you get your money. But if you are the president's sister's friend and you come in with a 20 million bucks, well, maybe you don't. And so the idea here is the World Bank's going to be able to do 2 things. Number one, you can trace where exactly the money goes and to make sure it's being spent in the most efficient way possible. And the second thing you're doing is you're making sure that the people that are getting paid are those that should be getting paid. And so you can then eliminate or dramatically reduce that leakage or friction. We can go through that. Let's keep going here. Back. I think this thing is kind of stuck. Well, it's not the last one. We have another one. Actually, what we'll do is we'll go through the last the last bullet point here. This is another project we're working on. Does anybody here in the audience, have you ever heard of Hernando de Soto? Ring a bell? Okay. So Hernando came to visit me in my office, and he's all about land titling and land reform. But he said, okay, in Peru, I have a really, really big problem. And here's the problem, and maybe tokenization can help solve this. The problem is this. So you have people that live on the surface of the land. The way the Peruvian and frankly most countries in the world operate is that the people that own the surface of the land don't necessarily own what's below it. Right? So Newmont Mining, in the case of Peru, goes and purchases the concession of gold that's underneath the surface. It's a gigantic gold mining concession. They purchase that, but then they have to get the top layer. So what they do is they buy all the little landowners around that area. It's in a fairly remote part of Peru. This is a true story. So what happens is this. The landowners get purchased. They were farming potatoes, and now the land has been converted into a mine. So then Newmont goes to Wall Street, hires Morgan Stanley or Goldman Sachs. They raise $2 billion. They get a mine running, and they're doing it admittedly in the right way. They have the proper tailings facilities, they have proper employment contracts, they built a school and a road. But then a group of, let's call them troublemakers, say to the local population, it could be NGOs, it could be whomever, community leaders, and they say, hey, you guys got a raw deal, you surface landowners. This mining company's just come in, and they're making billions of dollars off of your, poor, you poor people. And so the former landowners say, wow, I did get a raw deal here. What am I going to do about it? And they get together and they block access to the mine. They block the roads. So that's problematic. Fast forward 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, the mine is stopped. Nothing can get in or out. And all of a sudden you have a very big problem for Newmont Mining. And Newmont says, hey, look, I did everything right. I purchased the land, I did my corporate social responsibility, et cetera. I even bought the land from the people at fair market prices, right? I didn't gouge them. I paid whatever was fair. But the reality is this. The poor person sitting in Peru sees billions of dollars going out the door and doesn't feel like he or she got anything out of it other than the land sale. So that's the problem. Oh, wait, it gets worse. If it could possibly get worse. Illegal miners now that Newmont's gone, illegal miners go with a backhoe and a shovel and an excavator, and they start digging everything up. And how you mine for gold and how you extract the gold itself from the ore is you cook it with mercury. And then after you've done that, you dump all the mercury on the ground, and it's toxic forever to the environment. Then the next people come by, the narco money launderers, and they say, hey, you're producing gold. Let me give you money, dollars, and you give me the gold. It's a great way of laundering money. So now you have this horrible ecosystem, and you look back and you say, how did we get here, right? We shouldn't be in this situation. So, blockchain. What Hernando came to me and explained this problem, and then we went to the World Bank Innovation Lab that has a blockchain division, and we said, what can we do here? So what we're doing now is we're working on, let's call it a royalty token. So imagine now the Peruvian government issues a royalty token that enables the token holder to get a certain percentage of the royalties of the mine. And so the Peruvian government issues these, they keep some, they issue them to Newmont, then Newmont distributes them to all of the stakeholders, to that poor potato farmer, to the community leaders, to the NGOs, to whomever, right? And now everyone is incented for this mine to work, and people feel like they actually own something. Because in the past what happened is the royalties would go to the Peruvian government, and then the Peruvian government would send it to the municipality, and the municipality would, who knows, there was leakage all along the way. So now the person on the ground has a stake in the mine working. So we're working on a tokenization, a product where we tokenize the royalties of mining companies. And by Hernando's own estimation, there's something like 120, the numbers are a lot of zeros here, $120 trillion of value that's trapped beneath the Earth's surface, that if it were properly harnessed, it could do a lot of good for the communities, for the mines, for the government, etc. And if the World Bank can play a role in being a neutral arbiter of this, it would be fantastic. So look, these are some of the things that we're working on. It's very, very early days, and I represent just one shareholder of the World Bank, and there are 189 countries that comprise the World Bank, and there are 25 board seats, so I'm just one. But I'm very incented to make sure that that the United States is a thought leader, and that we're constructive in helping the World Bank solve all of its problems, and there are very many problems that we can solve, and blockchain could be one of a series of solutions to the problem set that we face. I'll stop here because I'm at 0, and I'm happy to take questions, or how does the process work? All right. Does anybody have a question? Yep.
Why Australia, and when do you think you'll see secondary market trading in the bond?
Okay. The question was why Australia, and when do we see secondary market trading? The short answer is it just happened. It was serendipitous. The Commonwealth Bank of Australia and the World Bank got together and they said, hey, why don't we do this? And it was just one of those things that happens. They do expect to have secondary trading. I have heard that in the next 6 months, they expect that these bonds will trade. But keep in mind, there are only 5 owners of this, of Bond I. So I'm not sure how much liquidity there's going to be. Plus, it's really small. But the next go around, the next Bond I is going to be $1 billion, and this is going to be bigger. So. The minimum denomination, because there were only 5 buyers. Yeah.
So a question for when you go to these emerging markets, how will you educate the folks of this token that you're going to be giving them?
So that's a great question. When the last time Hernando came to Washington, it was a snow day. It was the first big snow day we had. I remember it was a couple months ago, and we were supposed to have a seminar at the World Bank, and we couldn't do it because everything was snowed out. So we got on his iPhone, and we stood behind a tree with a bunch of snow on it, and we said, "Dear followers of Hernando, we're very sorry that we can't watch the podcast at the World Bank and so forth." And there were like 2 million people that saw us next to that tree in the snow in Peru. So what Hernando has done is he's used intelligently, and for somebody of and I say this with great respect, of his generation, he's mobilized Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and believe it or not, people in the rural parts of Peru have iPhones and Twitter accounts. So it may sound hard to believe, but it's true. So that's how you get people to understand how it works. And look, let's not underestimate that technology can springboard the traditional infrastructure. Take, for example, today in Venezuela, a country that's literally on the edge of the abyss. People are buying milk with Bitcoin because they have 1.7 million% inflation every year. So until that stabilizes, they're going to use something else. And so some of the biggest Bitcoin users in the world, in Latin America certainly, are in Venezuela. So anybody else? Yeah.
I'm curious, what are the technology stacks that the World Bank is using, and are your technical teams considering technical partnerships with anybody out there?
Okay, I'll answer that by saying I don't know. I'm a finance guy, but what I will say is, if any of you out there in the audience are technologists and you're interested in giving me your card, I'll put you in touch with our blockchain lab and with our technology team. But the bank has 18,000 people around the world, and so the technology division within the bank are not just our IT and our CTO folks, but the blockchain lab. They're very sophisticated, so I'm happy to put you in touch with them. Thank you so much.